This conference will now be recorded.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to this exciting session about the global assessment on the current state of organizational excellence developed by the Organizational Excellence Specialist Organization. My name is Sabina Posandziewski, and I'll be moderating the session for the next hour. I invite you to please use the chat for any questions or comments you wish to share. And I'm pleased to introduce Dawn Ringrose, who is the founder of the Organizational Excellence Specialist and will introduce herself further and speak to our content today. Over to you, Dawn.
Thank you very much, Sabina. I'm pleased to make this presentation. It's the third of three in this series sharing the Global OE Index results. And today we're going to be focusing on 11 industry sectors where we've been able to gather quite a bit of data and information and show you a profile for each one of these sectors, which is very interesting for the sectors themselves. And it's interesting for others to compare how they measure up to these sectors as well. When I first started doing this study, this is way back when, it started at ASQ, actually, with the Organizational Excellence Technical Committee. And we were looking for a study to do that would unite the excellence community and something that would be very valuable for the working population at large. And so we decided to do this very unique study on what is the current state of excellence in the world today by size, industry sector, and region. And it's funny that that question had never been asked before, because all of these excellence models were introduced and excellence efforts started way back in about 1990. And we've been very good about doing research on high performing organizations using the same principles and practices and speaking to the success stories and award programs, but we had neglected to take a look at what was going on in the world at large. So this is why I was so excited to do this study. And it had at the time the support from global organizations in the excellence field and the quality field. So it was great to have their moral support. They thought it was a great idea too. So now we've got close to 4,000 respondents, and we've got a good cross section of respondents by size, industry sector, and region. And we've even got a number of high responding countries so that we can speak to what's going on in a particular country, which is fantastic. And of course, this allows us to look at where are we doing well and what do we need to improve, where do we focus those improvement efforts. And you think about high performing organizations and how good they are in a community and how they contribute to the economy, how they set up trade relationships, how all of this trickles into the resident quality of life, because these organizations buy goods and services, they employ people, they make donations to the community and good causes like volunteer time or money. And all of this trickles into the resident quality of life. And when you think about it, if you've got a number of high performing organizations in a given country, it helps create a brand image for the country and the way that country does business. So this is very, very important as we look at, why excellence, what's in it for me. There's a lot of good reasons. So these are some of the committees and international organizations that were very supportive of what we were doing at the time. And I was asked to lead this, and I jumped at the chance because I thought, wow, this is a unique study. I'm keen to see what the current state of excellence is. And the study did not have a budget. So what we've been able to do is be very creative and innovative and mobilize volunteer researchers around the world. And I like to call them the rock stars, because this study wouldn't have been possible without them. So my gratitude goes out to these exceptional people. And we're using the framework that I have developed. What I did was I captured all of the principles and practices that we found in excellence models, so that we would have everything sitting in one place. And similarly with the rating system, I studied all of the frameworks, and I made sure that we had a rating system that was quite close so that it would be meaningful to everyone else. And with this publication that I wrote, I also added implementation guidelines because I'm a certified management consultant and we do this sort of work all the time with clients. So I wanted to share with the working population, well, how do you implement all of these practices? It answered one of the most frequently asked questions that I had, which was, how do you do this or how do you do that? So here's the principles that we find in the excellence models. And here are the key management areas that we find in the excellence models. And there's 102 practices in these key management areas. And if we're dealing with a micro-sized organization, there's 51 practices. And so that just gives you an idea of how robust excellence models are and the depth at which we're looking at organizations. Now, for these principles on the previous slide, we use a subjective scale. It's kind of a gut feel from 1 to 10, low to high, about the extent to which you think the principle is part of your organization and the way people work together. And for the key management areas and all the practices, we use an objective scale from 1 to 10. And it speaks to the degree to which the practice is deployed in the organization, the results you're getting, the approach you're using is a good approach or not, the mindset that you have, do you have a continual improvement mindset or not? And so very different scales, but important that we use those different scales in getting people to self-assess their organizations. And we like to make it nice and easy so anyone can participate, staff, management, leadership, and even what we call an other role, which is board members. We've got an automated assessment tool that allows respondents to participate easily and run through the assessment. And it's the full assessment is the one that allows us to get input on the principles and the practices across the key management areas. And we've also done another assessment on just the principles, which I've discussed at the first session in this series. So in this particular webinar, we're looking at full assessment. And these are the variables that we've collected information on, the role that people play, the size from micro, small, medium, and large. That's based on number of employees. The type of organization, whether it's government, business, or nonprofit. What industry sector? There's 21 industry sectors that we have in the International Industrial Classification. And of course, we want to know country, and we gather not only the ratings, but all these wonderful open-ended comments from participants, which really provide rationale for the ratings. And we've been sharing the aggregate results from the study over the last 10 years. Now that the study's been conducted far and wide, we want to make sure that we're keeping everybody up to date because there's been keen interest, of course, in this study. So we continue to publish on the Organizational Excellence Technical Committee open LinkedIn site, on our own website where we have a page dedicated to this where the reports are. Anybody can download them and take a look in detail. We've also written articles for reputable newsletters, and we've been out speaking at all sorts of international conferences. And we really with the intention of being of benefit to all the stakeholders, not just a project that reunites the excellence community, but wanting to really make the working population at large aware of excellence models and how over the last 30 plus years the use of these models has validated that if you put the practices in place, you help develop a culture committed to excellence, which is characterized by the principles, and you go on to achieve exceptional results across a balanced system of measurement. There's a lot of probably 80% of the working population hasn't even heard about excellence models, and it's kind of a well-kept secret that shouldn't be. So this study has really helped to make others aware of excellence models and how powerful they are and how they can be used for their benefit in their organization to improve performance. So let's get to the data and information on the 11 industry sectors. These are the sectors, these are the number of respondents that we have in each of the sectors. And I don't report on an industry sector unless I've got at least 25 respondents. And I think it's safe to say that the more respondents, the better, because the more respondents you have, the more confident you are in reporting the results. So, most of these sectors, we've got some pretty good results. And for the remaining sectors, I'll mention that at the end. We've gathered a fair bit of data, but we still have some more data to collect because we're not going to be able to report on them until we've got enough respondents. So this is what I'll be covering today. So the construction sector, important to every economy, of course. This is how they did when they were assessing the principles. Their highest rating is that focus on the customer, whereas the lowest rating was on the database decision making. And this is as they think about their culture and the degree to which these things are very much a part of their organization and the way people work together. And I always like to take a look at the variation between the ratings, and there's just a small amount of variation here. When you see consistency throughout, it is a good sign for an organization. And also it's really interesting to take a look at the difference between the way the respondents are viewing their culture and the deployment of the best management practices across the key management areas. So as we look at the deployment of practices across the key management areas, here are the aggregate ratings. And we've got the highest rating in performance measurement, lowest rating on customers, and very little variation across the ratings. Now you'll probably have noticed that the ratings between the principals and the key management areas are significantly different. They drop about a point. And we've seen this throughout the global research study. When people subjectively rate the culture, and they've got this gut feel about their culture, that's one thing. But when they dive down deep into all the practices in these areas, then the rubber hits the road. And they realize that, the ratings they drop, and the open-ended comments tell us more about that. And what's very interesting, if in the previous slide, they had a very high rating on focus on the customer, 7.45. But here in the customers area, what's happening? 4.38. So keep an eye on that sort of thing as we run through these, ratings for the different industry sectors. It does beg the question how we can think in our culture. Yeah, we've got a real focus on the customer, but when we get right down to the practices that are in the customers area, it's a bit enlightening that maybe we need to do some more work in this area. Here's a quote from one of the respondents in Australia talking about a concern that they have. And these open-ended comments are absolute gold because it really gives us the rationale for the ratings. It really tells us what's going on in organizations, and it by role too, whether it's staff, management, leadership, or the other role. It's really interesting to take a look at these open-ended comments, and we've probably got about 1,000 pages of these. So our challenge is to summarize things so that the people learning more about this study can appreciate what it is that's being said, and try to summarize it so that we can see overall what's going on with all of this data and information. Now for the education sector, of course, a very important sector for every single country in the world. I mean, it's all about getting our population off to a good start and enabling them to be successful. And on the principles, the highest rating is that focus on the customer, who is of course the student, and the lowest rating is on prevention-based process management, which is taking a look at the way we're working, and we want to prevent problems from occurring again. And we want to make sure that our work processes are well documented, and we're always analyzing and working on improving them, and making changes where need be. Education average rating on the principles was below the other sectors. I think that's important to note. And they had a moderate amount of variation on the ratings across the principles. And on the key management areas, their strength showed up in the leadership area, and whereas the lowest rating was on the employee side of things. And I find this particularly interesting because we know that when an organization focuses on their employees and works on employee satisfaction, that translates into customer satisfaction because they're better able to serve the customer. And that then translates into better performance for the organization. And that performance, in a business could be profitability, but in a nonprofit organization, I mean, it could be tendency to refer, let's say, to an educational institution. So there was moderate variation on these ratings as well. And here's a quote from a respondent in Canada. And you can see just how valuable these comments are. And we find whenever we do an assessment that leadership is always surprised by comments that are made. There's things that they don't know that are going on, things that they can address right away. And it's an eye-opening experience for them. And that's my favorite way to do assessments, actually, is to invite all the people in an organization to participate so you hear from everybody. Everybody's input is very, very valuable, and it paints a picture, a really great picture, with probably more information than a leadership could ever imagine, and that they can really use that in their planning and improvement efforts. So for the electricity, gas, steam, and air conditioning sector, what we have, as you can see, the highest rating here is on the leadership involvement side of things, whereas the lowest rating is on database decision making. And there's quite a difference between those two. And as we see more variation on the principles too, a moderate amount, which means not everybody's seeing this quite the same way, right? And as we look at the key management areas, we see the highest rating is on work with suppliers and partners, which are very important in this sector. And interesting that the lowest rating is on customers. And there's a little bit of variation across these ratings, not too much. And here's a quote from a respondent in Sweden. And these comments, they give you a real flavor for how healthy the management system is, or how mature the management system is, and how things are going in organizations. So this particular organization looks like things are going quite well. The financial and insurance sector, interesting that the highest rating is on focus on the customer amongst these principles, and the lowest rating is on the prevention-based process management. And a little bit more variation on these ratings, just a moderate amount. And in comparison to the other sectors that I'm reporting on today, this financial and insurance sector had the highest rating on database decision making. And as we look at how this sector is doing on the key management areas, the highest rating is on performance measurement for the organization as a whole. And the lowest rating is on employees. There's all sorts of practices that you need to have in place to look after your employees really well. And so this is an area where they need to improve. And here's a comment from Mexico and how they're focused on customer satisfaction and what they do to help buoy that up. Human health and social work, again, a sector that's near and dear to most people's hearts, is a healthcare system, and that's indeed another really important industry sector, keeping a population healthy and well. So let's take a look at how this sector is doing. On the principles, the highest rating is focus on the customer or the patient. And the lowest rating is on prevention-based process management, which is interesting. And there's quite a difference in ratings between those two. So you can see the range and yes, more variation on the ratings across the principles. And we're going to see too, as we look at the next set of key management areas, we're going to see these ratings on the focus on the customer being quite high. And then when you take a look at the key management areas, you're going to see the rating on the employees being quite low. And this is reminding us too about this relationship between employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction, and performance of an organization. So that's immediately, gets your attention in terms of something to work on. But in the key management areas, we've got the higher rating for this particular sector is on leadership. The lowest ratings seem to be on the work processes and employees. And we see a little bit more variation across the ratings. A quote from management in South Africa, speaking about their dedicated people. But there's a problem with the procedures, and we all know that you can work on procedures and increase you could find ways to save lots of time and costs by doing good work in the work processes area. And it's often through benchmarking too. People that are working in healthcare can learn an awful lot from, let's say, those in the hospitality industry. And in this particular case, we're talking about patient intake procedures. And just think about what goes on at the front desk of a hotel. So there's things that we can learn from each other, and there's always things that we can learn with the employees in an organization doing the work and putting their heads together and saying, gee, we've got a particular problem in this area. What can we do about it? And getting all those ideas and suggestions and innovative thinking, bringing that to the table. Information and communication, very important sector today as we take a look at how rapidly this is changing, and especially in the technology that's being used and the rapid way that we communicate, not only within our organizations, but outside with others. And here we see that the highest rating on the principles is focus on the customer, and the lowest rating is on the database decision making. But they're both these are very reasonable ratings. These are very showing that this is an organization that is tending towards high performance, because high performance is between 7.5 and 10. And so you can see this particular sector is doing, quite well. In comparison to the other 10 sectors that we're taking a look at, this particular sector had the highest rating on prevention-based process management and partnership development. And as we take a look at the key management areas, the highest rating is in leadership and performance measurement for the organization as a whole, and their lowest rating is on the employees area. And here's a comment from management in Singapore. And Singapore is a very sophisticated nation when it comes to business excellence. And you'll see Singapore at the top of a lot of lists when we're taking a look at, social, economic variables, and they're a real standout. They've got an interesting story because they went from a first world country or a third world country to a first world country over the span of about 30 years, doing a lot of good work. And it's been an amazing transformation there. And they've got, when you visit Singapore and you go to something like a conference, you notice that everything just is flawless. You see it throughout their economy. And if you're there as a visitor, just experiencing Singapore, you can see the work that has been done there to make sure that things run very efficiently, effectively, and is really characterized by outstanding performance, whether it's the government or the business or nonprofit sector. It's pretty outstanding. So the manufacturing sector, very important sector, of course, to any economy. And what we see here on the principles is that highest rating being focused on the customer, and the lowest rating on prevention-based process management, and a little bit of variation across the ratings. On the key management areas, we see the highest rating is leadership. Lowest rating is on the employee side of things. Not too much of a difference between them, about a point. And there's not too much variation on the ratings across the key management areas. Here's a comment from a management role in Germany. And it's interesting, they're saying how they track customer feedback to reduce defects, but they rarely hold joint meetings with their suppliers to address recurring quality issues. And this is the beauty of doing a self-assessment against the excellence model, is that it allows you to take a look at great depth into the culture of your organization and the way you work together, and the extent to which you're using the practices that we know are common to high performing organizations. And so it shows where you're doing well, but it also reveals the things that you need to work on. In the other service area, this sector it includes things like membership organizations. So this is very important when you think about membership organizations and chambers of commerce and professional associations like certified management consultants. And you think about industry sector organizations like ASQ and so forth. So these membership organizations are very important. And we can take a look at their ratings on the principles, and we can see that the focus on the customer is the highest rated. Lowest rated is database decision making and prevention based process management. And I might just add that this is something we see in the global research study overall. We see these kind of results, this sector, not surprisingly, had the highest rating of all the sectors on societal commitment. And on the key management areas, the highest rating was on the performance measurement that they're using across the key management areas. And the lowest rating was on customers and work processes. So once again, we saw a high rating on the principles on focus on the customer at 7.38. And we see, almost a 2-point difference on the customer's area, where we've got all these best management practices at 5.42. So that's indeed interesting as we look at how people are feeling subjectively and when they dive down deeper into the practices. There's a comment from a staff person in Brazil. And you could see that they're speaking pretty positively about their nonprofit organization and the investment that's being made in developing staff and collaborating with others in the community. The professional, scientific, and technical sector, this is where all the management consultants are and engineers, and researchers, and so forth. This is where a lot of our professions are, white collar kind of professionals. And the highest rating for these organizations on the principles was leadership involvement and focus on the customer. Lowest rating on the prevention-based process management. And we see a little bit more variation across the ratings here for this sector. And overall, this sector had the highest overall average rating on the principles in general. And as you compare them to the other sectors that I'm covering today, and they've got the highest ratings on 3 principles in particular: leadership involvement, alignment, and focus on the customer. And as we look at the key management areas, their performance measurement for the organization as a whole is their highest rated area, and the lowest rated was the customers. And again, we see this difference between thinking they're doing very well in their culture, their focus on the customer, but then it's like quite a drop to how they're doing in the customers area. So that's worth investigating in terms of, well, what exactly is going on in that customers area. And here's a quote from someone in the United Kingdom, a staff role. And you can see here where this is such a valuable comment from a staff person saying that daily guidance is important to them, performing their role and needing guidance and feedback, and they're feeling a little lost here. Now, public administration, defense, and compulsory social security. This is where our government organizations are represented. And we had a good sample size with regards to governments around the world, the 3 levels of government. And their highest rating on the principles was focus on the customer, and lowest rating was on database decision making. A little bit more variation across the ratings than we see for some of the other sectors, moderate amount. And on the key management areas, the highest rating on the performance measurement for the organization as a whole. And now again, we see the lowest rating on the customers. And that's a big difference between focus on the customer as a principle at 7.16 and the lowest rating on the customers area here at 3.54. There's a lot more variation for this sector across the ratings on the principles and on the key management areas. Probably saw more variation here than many other sectors. And here's a comment from someone in the management role from New Zealand who's working in government, and how they collect lots of data, but it's rarely used to shape policies, which is indeed an opportunity. And then, of course, there's this disconnect when citizens come in with complaints and how they address those complaints, because this is such a rich source of feedback. You're lucky to get them because, we know through the research that customers don't have a tendency to complain most often. And if we do have the value of those complaints, well, we can do something about them. And you don't want your customers in this day and age going to social media to complain, because then everybody knows about it, right? You want to have this opportunity to make it easy for customers to complain, so you get an opportunity to address it and fix what's going on within to prevent those sorts of things from happening again. Transportation and storage, this is the last sector, and this is where we have the highest rating here on focus on the customer. You can see it's very much into the high performance area on that particular principle, or it was the very high part of this more subjective rating in the kind of high range, medium high or high range. And the lowest rating was on the database decision making. In comparison to the other sectors, transportation and storage had the highest rating on people involvement and continuous improvement, which is interesting. And as we look at the key management areas, their highest rating was on measuring across the key management areas, and their lowest rating was on employees. But all the ratings are really quite high. It's an impressive sector. And here we see a comment from China, and it sounds from the staff vantage point that things are going quite well in terms of the way they're dealing with customers and what the customers are saying about them. Now, what I've also done here is I've taken a look at all of the ratings on the principles and all the best management practices, because when we take a look at their interrelationships, because we know that there's certain practices across the key management areas that contribute directly to the principles. And so if you've got a low rating in one of the principles, you think, oh, gee, what is it we need to work on in order to buoy that up? You look at the touch points with the practices, and you take a look at those ratings that are low too. So you know what you need to work on. And as I took a look at all of this data, and we take a look at the two lower rated principles, prevention-based process management and database decision making, we also notice that there's these low rated practices in the work processes area. And most of them, so obviously work needs to be done in this area in order to buoy up those lower rated principles. We can also see how the low ratings, where they cluster across the key management areas. And when we report the results, we don't just report the touch points, so we can see these interrelationships. We also say, well, gee, how do those low ratings, are they clustering somewhere? What's jumping out at us? And we color code it so we can see it with the red color. We use blue and green to show that things are going quite well, and then we use the yellow to show that things are getting better, but heading towards better performance. But we use the red to say, oh boy, focus on this, because this is an area that we consider to be just beginning, and it's like you haven't even thought about putting these practices in place, or maybe you've thought a little bit about it and you're just starting to put it in place. So it's something that jumps out as something that you're going to need to do. And also the practices in the framework, I might add, when you take a look at the practices in each key management area, they're provided in a sequential order. The practice you want to start with first, and then you go down to the practices throughout, and so you pretty methodically can go along with putting these things in place in that kind of sequential order. So where we saw these lower ratings clustering was in the planning area, most of the planning practices actually. Again, most of the practices in the suppliers and partners area, because there's only a few there. In the resource management area, about half of the practices. And then we saw a few in the continuous improvement area. As you take a look at the kind of, when they're reflecting on these key management areas and saying, where are we doing well? Where do we need to concentrate effort? We see that there's a bit of work to do there in several areas, and then a little bit of work to do on performance measurement of the key management areas practices, in three different areas. So it's very, very interesting as you kind of take a look at these things to work on. But when you think about it, there's 102 practices. Organizations are actually doing pretty good. And having a few things to work on is just the improvement initiatives that you have to undertake. And whenever we do work like this with an organization, which is very important to do at the organizational level, because every organization is unique, and their profile is going to be a little bit different, but it really gives you a view of what's going well and what needs to improve. And often the first time that an organization does something like this, they're going to have a few things to work on, and just depends on how mature that organization is and the extent to which they've got a good management system in place. So having these things to work on is not too bad, and it's just something that you're going to get your staff to work on, all your employees to work on, and take ownership of certain of these things, things that you need to implement and work on over the next year or two or three. And this is the way we like to do the work. We like to say, okay, here's your assessment results, and here's the things you need to work on, and here's your individual action plans, and let's assign some employees to those individual action plans and get them involved in doing the work to improve, because who knows better on what needs to improve, and they probably got some good ideas and suggestions, and if they need training and things like that, we'll can supply that. But it's absolutely amazing what employees can do on their own, and the value that they can deliver. So our next steps are to attract the remaining respondents that we need for this study so that we can report on all industry sectors and make sure that we have at least 25 respondents in each of the sectors. And here's where we're currently at on these remaining sectors. You can see on some of them we're getting pretty close to 25. On others we need to do a little bit more work. So we'll work with our researchers to do that work, and would appeal to anyone watching this video too, that if you are in one of these particular sectors, do visit that webpage on the Global OE Index where the links to the survey instruments are, and feel free to participate. Your data and information is absolutely confidential. We only report on aggregate results, and so rest assured that it will go no further your own individual responses or organizational information. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'll stop the recording, and we can turn the session over to a discussion with everybody about these results, and have a good discussion. Thank you very much.